production, we have a podcast. You're listening to the Premier Rockets podcast. It's H-Town Hoops, hosted by Brandon Scott and Adam Spolane.
That's right. It is the H-Town Hoops podcast. I am Brandon Scott here with Adam Spolane. Austin Mendez is producing this thing for us as always. And we got the news, Adam. We finally got here to the draft. The Houston Rockets select Reed Sheppard, number 3 overall, with the 3rd overall pick in the NBA draft. I got to tell you, and I'll start this thing off, I am a little bit surprised. I went into this draft expecting them to draft Donovan Clingan, but it's not like anybody was ever a sure thing in this particular draft. But I've said this before on this podcast with you that I thought Reed Sheppard made the most sense as a fit, as feeling a very particular need for the Rockets. So I like this pick. I think it's a really good pick for them. How he factors into their rotation is another discussion and maybe something further down the road. But I like the pick. My initial thoughts, what say you, Spo?
He's the cleanest fit of all the guys that they could have taken in that spot, or at least of the guys that were in the mix at 3. He was the cleanest fit. They need shooting desperately. He is probably the best shooter in this draft. And he's not just a shooter. He can put the ball on the floor and make plays. He can run the pick and roll. Defensively, obviously, there are going to be some questions there, but he can at least make plays on that end of the floor. And I think that Ime Udoka will like that about him. But I think that when you look at the guys that the Rockets already had on the roster, I think he was the one that was just the easiest fit that you can envision. Him being on the floor with Sengun. You can envision him being on the floor with Amin Thompson. You can envision him being on the floor with Jalen Green. Like, you can see him being on the floor with basically everybody that they have, whereas if they had gone with Donovan Clingan, then I think you start getting into some questions. Well, how does he look with Sengun? Does this mean that they want to trade Sengun moving forward? Does this mean they don't think that Sengun is a part of the future? So they want to answer those questions with this pick. So I think that if they were going to keep the pick, this was the easiest pick that they could make, and I think that it's probably the right one.
Yeah, I would say, you tell me if you agree with this or not, Adam. I would say that he, at least on paper, it has to actually materialize, and so it's hard to just like say this is a projection. But I am anticipating him as like immediately, as soon as he joins the team, being their best outside shooter, their best perimeter shooter. I think that is fair to say. Fred VanVleet obviously has a reputation. I think that for me, if I'm looking at it, I mean, 52% from 3 in college or this past season for Reed Sheppard, to me, I feel like he's automatically, or maybe not automatically, but can be assumed to be their best outside shooter immediately.
No, I don't think there's any doubt about that. And again, this is a team that they took a lot of threes, not as many as maybe they would have liked to have taken, but they were a bottom 10 3-point shooting team. And a lot of that was just that they didn't have a whole lot of, they didn't have guys that you were necessarily worried about. Their highest volume 3-point shooters, frankly, aside from VanVleet, weren't very good from long distance last year. So that changes that. And he just gives you so much more space for you to operate. If they want to dump the ball into Alperen Sengun, then you have some spacing there, somebody that he can kick it out to if teams want to double. If you want Jalen Green to go drive and kick, he's going to spread the floor and give Jalen Green some better driving lanes. So I think that he's just the cleanest fit that they have. And then you can absolutely see him being on the floor with Amin Thompson. You can see him being on the floor with Alperen Sengun. So again, I thought this was probably, I don't know if it was a no-brainer, but had they stayed at 3 and they want to just kind of build on what they did last year, I thought this was a no-brainer.
So going into this, I think we all thought that what direction they went in with the 3rd pick would tell us, if not a whole lot, at the very least something about how they viewed the rest of these young guys or the rest of their players on their roster already. To me, and you just mentioned this a moment ago, if they had gone with Clingan, that would have presented the obvious question of, okay, now what are you doing with Alperen Sengun? I think the implication there is they are at least open to moving on from Alperen Sengun had they gone that direction. They did not. They draft Sheppard. What does this tell us, if anything, about how they view their current set of players? Because to me, if I'm one of those core 6, I'm viewing this in a positive light because you have now added a player that not is necessarily, like if I'm Sengun, obviously, not necessarily is going to be like my replacement or edging me out of here, but more so than anything, a guy that, as you just described and illustrated there, a guy that I can play with. If I'm a Min Thompson, I can play with this guy. If I'm Jalen Green, if I'm Alperen Sengun, if I'm whoever, name your player, name your favorite Rocket, he can play with Reed Sheppard. What does that pick say about how they must view this current core?
I think had they gone in a different direction, you're saying, well, he is here to take, had they gone with Klingon, he's here to take Shingun's job. I think is probably the conclusion that you would have drawn. But with Sheppard, I think he's here to supplement what we already have. And I think that is what you look at if you are the guys that are already on this roster. Like, this is the guy who's going to help us get better. This is the guy who's going to take us get the next step, not a guy who's going to usurp my role from somebody else. So I think that's what you kind of learn from this pick, is that they feel like, and I think that they kind of signaled this throughout the offseason, like, hey, they really like their team. They like the guys that they already have. They're basically bringing back the entire roster. 11 of their top 12 in terms of minutes played last year are under contract and are going to be back next season. Plus, you add Steven Adams, and now you add Sheppard to that mix. So you're almost just building on what they did last year. They'll have to obviously get a little bit healthier. That's the big key. But you're not starting from scratch anymore. And so Ime Udoka has these guys that he has now been able to coach for the last 14 months. You take what you finished with last year, and then you go into camp in September, and you just build on that. I think that's what you're looking at now. And had they gone in a different direction, I'm not going to say you're starting from scratch, but in some areas you would have been starting from scratch.
I think that also, though, in terms of, and I don't want to overstate the impact that, a 6'2", 6'3", however tall Reed Sheppard is, that a rookie is going to have on the team. But I do think there's something to be said for adding shooting to this team, like that being one of the key and obvious things that they were missing. I'm not saying that's the thing that takes them from being barely a 500 team and fighting for that final play-in spot to, the top play-in spot or a 6 seed or anything like that. But that does, I think, change the dynamic a little bit, or sort of just raises the level and the caliber of team, that now that you've got a knockdown shooter, at least one of them, I feel like you can't have too many of them. They could stand to add more, or at least get some improvement from within in their shooting. But I feel like not only is he a perfect fit, but as I said in the very beginning, he fills a very particular need. And I feel like, just like bottom line, and you obviously want this to be the case if you draft a guy 3rd overall, but I think bottom line, and we'll see what else happens and how everything else plays out with their roster through the course of the offseason, but I think they're a better basketball team with him on it.
Well, they were a below average offense last year. They were 20th. They were 20th in offensive rating last year, and a big reason for that was that they were a bottom 10 3-point shooting team. So if you can get this guy looks from 3, and they should be able to get him plenty of looks from 3, especially when you consider some of the other guys that they have on the roster, that's going to help the offense, and that's going to help them win games. He also, again, the defense is going to be the question for him, and we understand that. That's always been the case. But he has the ability to make plays defensively, and that's what he did a lot of at Kentucky, where he would come up with a bunch of steals. He would block shots. So, that's getting you out on the break a little bit. This is a team that wants to run. This is a team that wants to play fast. I think that he will help them when it comes to pace, because he will be able to force some turnovers. That's what Tari Eason was so good at doing last year before he got hurt. Again, I think that's something that Reed Sheppard can do as well. So there are times where he will struggle on the defensive end of the floor, but he can also make plays and help you in that area also.
Separate, but I think still related, because it has to do with the Rockets' team building strategy and overall effort here. Earlier in the day, really the day before, we find out that the Rockets and Nets are essentially exchanging future draft assets. To summarize it, basically the Rockets traded a great deal of control over the Nets' future draft picks to now have control over a great deal of the Suns' future draft picks. And more specifically, they doubled up the ammo. Like, they've got now more picks than they had before with the Nets picks. So all of that being said, what do we make of this in terms of how they're trying to use this ammunition to either go get a star or to entice one of the players or to entice the Suns from sending over one of their stars, either Kevin Durant or Devin Booker? Like, what do we feel like is? What do you feel like is the long-term play that the Rockets must be trying to make here by not just accumulating picks but doubling up?
Well, I think the big thing is that they get more assets out of this. And so they gave Brooklyn back 2 assets, and in return, they get back 3 and maybe even 4, depending on what happens in 2029. So I think that's a big thing. Like, it's always good to get more assets. I know Brooklyn gave them what became the 3rd pick in the draft, and the Nets aren't very good. But the odds of the 2025 pick being the number 1 pick next year are still incredibly slim. Brooklyn could go 0-82. And that would only be a 14% chance of actually happening. So you play the lottery odds with that. So I think that they wanted to give themselves more assets in the future. And obviously you are betting on Phoenix being bad. And there's no reason to think that Phoenix won't be bad here moving forward. They still have Kevin Durant, who's still an excellent player, and they have Devin Booker in his prime. But you just saw how it fell apart with Brooklyn, and it happens very quickly. And the problem that Phoenix has is that it's going to be very, very difficult for them to improve that roster here in the next couple of years. Obviously, you have Booker and you have Durant, but after that, you're looking at Bradley Beal, who's under contract for a long time and basically untradeable at this point because of the no trade clause and also just because of the contract. So you basically they're pretty much at the second apron already with just those 3 guys. And it's a team that finished 6th in the West last year and lost all 4 playoff games. So the idea that they're suddenly going to take that next step and be contenders again, it seems highly unlikely. So you are betting that team becomes bad here in 2027 or 2029. And who knows what happens this season? Would you say the Phoenix Suns are locks to be in the playoffs in 2025? I can't say that they are with as good as the West is right now. So you never know what happens with that pick. So it was a very unique trade. I don't think I've ever seen a trade like it before, where you're basically giving a team back its picks and getting the picks of another team. I don't think we've seen that one before. And obviously, if Phoenix does decide to become sellers, and they could, we'll have to wait and see what happens. Their owner, Matt Ishbia, said they have no interest in trading Kevin Durant. And maybe they don't have interest in trading Kevin Durant. But if that thing starts out bad and Devin Booker says, hey, man, get me out of here, then at least the Rockets can say, okay, Phoenix, you want to trade Devin Booker? You're ready to, you don't control your own future. Well, we'll give you your future back. Just give us Devin Booker, and then you can start over. I think that's kind of what they're thinking if something were to happen with Phoenix. But if Phoenix wants to stay the course, then the Rockets still have those Suns picks, which I think would be very, very appetizing for another team, and they can go get another player that way.
It is a fascinating chess move because I know I've seen some folks criticize them for dealing away the Nets picks because everybody does expect the Nets to be bad, probably even the Nets themselves. I think we all agree with that the Nets are going nowhere and that, we can understand what the value would have been in having those picks. But I am fascinated by the idea of giving one team its future back to take the future of another team and dangle it in front of them and say, I dare you to pass this up. I dare you to actually believe in this thing that nobody else across the league actually believes in, and that you yourself tried out as an experiment and saw how it played out last year. And doggone well that that's about as good as it's going to get. That first round exit, that sweep in the first round. You think that you're going to take a step between now and whatever step Minnesota takes or whatever Denver looks like next year, or you just name your favorite team in the West, and you think whatever you got is going to be good enough to go up against that? You've hit your ceiling whether you know it or not. But hey, you know what? Here's your future right here sitting in front of us. And how did we get it? By giving another team their future back. Like, that is just a fascinating chain of events. regardless of or aside from how everything actually plays out, we're here for how it plays out, and that's really the long term, the bigger picture of, hey, what does this actually finally look like on a basketball court? But from a strategic standpoint, from a thought process standpoint, I am fascinated by the move that the Rockets made over the last 24 hours.
And Brandon, I think the interesting part of the two trades yesterday was the order in which they were leaked, because the first trade that got leaked was the Bridges trade. And so then once you see that, well, the expectation is, well, the Nets are tanking and it's over, and they're tanking without controlling their own picks. It is, I'm assuming that the Rockets trade with Brooklyn was worked out first and it just got leaked second, because I don't think there is any way that Brooklyn is making that Bridges trade if they don't already have their picks back. Because while the Nets weren't going to be good next year with Bridges, they still had the ability to at least tread water with Bridges, and they had some cap space where they could have gone out and make another move. So the idea that Brooklyn was just going to bottom out next year with Bridges is highly unlikely. So I think that's why, if you're the Rockets, that's why obviously they made the move that they made, is because they got their picks back from the Rockets. And so that's why it makes sense really for all parties. And I do wonder, because you have a lot of other teams that have given away their entire futures for certain guys. I do wonder if we start to see more teams try and buy their futures back, because it just makes sense. The Rockets gave the Nets a get out of jail free card basically with this, because now the Nets, I think Brooklyn knew it needed to tear it all down, but I don't think they wanted to do it understanding that they did not control their future. Now you can tear it all down because you do control your future at this point. So it made sense for Brooklyn. It makes sense for the Rockets. They get an extra asset out of it. And, we'll see what they use the assets on. Maybe Phoenix is able to figure this out, and maybe they turn out to be good and it doesn't work out in the end for the Rockets, but it's not a bad move at all.
Well, it makes even more sense than that, Adam, because it also in turn sets a blueprint for the Suns. It's like, hey, look at just in terms of the whole idea of buying your picks back or realizing that you're not going anywhere. And so it's a little bit different because of the caliber players we're talking about, like Mikal Bridges versus punting on like Kevin Durant and Devin Booker or what have you. I understand the difference in that, but it is sort of a blueprint of you know what, back to your point of how many teams are going, like, are we gonna establish a trend, set a trend at some point of teams? And this is not like something that's going to happen all the time, I don't think, but like just something that happens more often than you've ever seen, where, hey, you know what, a team realizes, you know what, I mortgage my future, but I can buy it back, and it's to me, it's just a really interesting concept. You talked about it working out for both parties, or working out for all parties. I would add to that, the entire Bridges to Houston conversation. Like, I am good with not ever having to see that anymore. But also, like, you look at how that played out. This makes more sense for both teams. It makes more sense for the Knicks to be interested in Bridges because they're closer to being where you'd want to be than the Rockets are. And so giving up what they gave up to get Bridges actually makes sense, because he can be somebody that pushes them over the edge or strengthens their case as a contender, at least in the Eastern Conference. I still don't think that that's a team that can win a title or anything, but you get why they would do that. And then for the Rockets, it makes much more sense than like trading for just like bringing in Mikal Bridges, who's a fine player. It makes much more sense to rack up these assets, double up on your assets, and then take the biggest of swings when it's time to take it. And for me, that means this is something to put a pin in and to monitor. Like, you're almost operating in parallel universes where the Rockets got their thing going on, but you're also paying attention to what the Phoenix Suns got going on, because, hey, the moment that thing goes left, or hey, once that NBA trade deadline comes, forget next offseason. Hell, this might be a conversation we revisit every time until the answer is something to the Rockets' liking, and they land with Devin Booker, or for whatever reason they decide that they do want Kevin Durant, or whatever it is. The answer is to their liking, and they just kind of put a pin in this, and keep monitoring what's going on with the Suns.
But let's also say it is very possible that the 7 guys that they had, the 7 first-round picks that they have on the roster now from the last 4 drafts, maybe that turns out to be enough. Maybe those guys are good enough to get them over the top. And in order to keep those guys, they have to go over the second apron. Well, what happens when you go over the second apron? You need to be able to add other players in other ways. And the best way to do that will be through the draft. So let's say they're over the second apron in 2029. You know, it would be nice to have then a couple first round picks. And so that now gives them the ability to where they can add cheap young talent down the road if that's something that they need. You're seeing this right now with Denver, where last year Denver traded. Actually, a great example of it is right now with what Minnesota just did tonight, where Minnesota trades to get Rob Dillingham in the first round of this draft. They trade with San Antonio. They give up a first round pick in 2030 and then another pick in 2031. Like, that's the type of stuff that you want to be able to do. Like, when your team is right there and it's ready to compete and you feel like you're right there, the ability to add another first round pick to the roster becomes wildly important. And now, if in 5 years the Rockets are in that position to where they need another player, they don't have to give up an asset in the future. Like, they can just say, hey, we've got these 2 picks that we got from this trade that we made in 2024. Let's go add to our roster that way and get some cheap, controllable players that have a chance to help us. And who knows, maybe we get a bonus and those picks wind up in the top 10, which is very possible.
See, that's why I love talking to you, Spo, because that is a great way to look at it. I don't even know that's the chess. This move is already a chess move in and of itself, but that's an even longer term chess move or play or way to look at it. Like, hey, what if all of these guys work out? A handful of them by that point become expensive, and now you need cheap talent. This is the way to get it. I was thinking more along the lines of, okay, this hoarding of future Suns picks and this belief that what the Suns got going on right now is not sustainable. Okay, well, maybe if you can't sell the Suns on their dreams and their hopes and dreams being ridiculous, maybe you can sell the next team on that, right? Like, go to the next team and say, hey, we all know damn well that what's going on in Phoenix ain't going to work. Here's their future. How would you like to have it? Since they apparently don't want it, they don't see what all of the rest of us see. And you look up and, okay, now instead I've got Jimmy Butler, or I don't know. I'm just throwing names out there, but you understand what I mean there, right? Like, just give me the star or the guy that puts us over the edge. Say I'm not willing to just bet on the core being enough in and of itself. Maybe it's a great supplement to our greater ambition of finding an established star, but we can do that in other places. There's that, because that's a real possibility that, hey, maybe Phoenix just doesn't play and somebody else will. Or like you said, these picks are further down the road. You got guys that you're still developing. See if they develop. See how it all works out. See how it all plays out. And maybe it turns out that you don't deal those picks at all. I view them as chess pieces, as a means to an end. But it could turn out that those picks actually turn into players for the Rockets at some point.
And let's not forget, they haven't fully divested from the Brooklyn Nets mess. And they still have that swap in 2027. And listen, they gave Brooklyn an out, and they give Brooklyn an opportunity here the next couple of years to rebuild their roster. But the idea that Brooklyn will be ready to compete in 2027 is still highly unlikely, because that will be a very young team. So Brooklyn could still, I mean, we've seen what the Rockets were a couple of years into their rebuild. Like, it takes some time in order to make that work. So Brooklyn could still be bad. They could still have a decent looking future 3 years from now, but they could still be very bad. And the Rockets would still have an opportunity to get what would be a major asset from the Nets if that comes to fruition. So they are obviously betting against Phoenix, but in a sense, they are also betting against Dallas in the future, and they still have a little bit of coverage with Brooklyn. So they have 3 teams that they can kind of look at that can help them add more players to the roster. So that's 3 teams. If you're a fan, that's 3 teams you get to root against here in the future.
All right, Adam, let's do this quickly so we can get out of here. Got to hear from Rockets brass. Obviously, they just Picked Reed Sheppard, number 3 overall. So a big night. Want to hear what they have to say about it all and what their future plans are with the roster that they have now. But we have not talked since the season officially ended. Obviously, the Boston Celtics win the NBA title in a gentleman's sweep against the Dallas Mavericks. But what that meant was, as soon as that was over, guys are eligible for their extensions. Namely, for our purposes, Jalen Green and Alperen Sengun officially extension eligible as of the end of this past NBA season, as of the end of the NBA Finals. What do you think about how this, and I guess maybe nothing's changed since the last time we talked about it, but do you get the sense that, and especially after what we've seen over the last couple of days, that the Rockets are more inclined to extend one of or both of these guys?
I don't know yet. I think today makes it seem likely that at some point they will get something done, at least with Sengun, because they had a chance to essentially draft his replacement and they didn't do it. There's no, they don't have to do that. Like, they don't have to give these guys extensions now. They can wait a year. And Rafael Stone said as much. We can go into restricted free agency with these guys.
I should have said, not to interrupt you, I should have said one of or both or neither. I should have absolutely thrown that out there as a possibility, but continue.
Yeah, for me, I think if I'm them, I would wait. I would wait and see what happens this season before I really commit, because these are serious contracts. You just saw what Scotty Barnes is going to get, $270 million. Yeah. Now, again, these are 25% extensions, and with the cap, if you want to do it now, if you're going to give a guy a max, now is the time to do it, because next year it goes up. A max salary becomes a whole lot more expensive a year from now because of the way that the cap moves. So I would not be in a rush to do it, but if you feel like these are two guys who you would give max extensions to, then go ahead and do it now. I don't know if the Rockets feel that way about either guy. I'm not sure there is anybody in this class that I would give the full 25% extension to. Not even, I don't think I would have even given it to Barnes, but I guess some teams feel like they have to do it. For me, I would wait and just see if you can find a middle ground, or you just wait and do it next summer when they hit restricted free agency. So I don't think they feel like they have to do it. And so I don't necessarily think that they will. The one time, and this is new for this front office really hasn't been in this position of having to sign guys to extensions. The one guy that they did it with was Kevin Porter Jr., and that was a very, very, very team-friendly deal, and he was a very different type of player than the other two guys are. So I don't know yet. And that deal also got done right before the start of training camp. So I don't think they'll be in any rush to get something done. It wouldn't shock me if they do, but I think if I'm them, I probably wait.
Yeah, I agree. I think it makes the most sense to wait with all of this. You actually kind of got a good thing going here. And if there could just be a little bit more patience with it to see how to just get, if for nothing else, you're just waiting on more information. On the one end, with the players, you're waiting on more information about Jalen Green and Alperen Sengun, and what kind of step are they going to take in year 4, as they are now extension eligible. And then on the other end, that other thing that we talked about, you're just waiting on this other thing to crash and burn, like everybody thinks it's going to be, like everybody thinks it's going to do, I should say, in Phoenix with the Suns. And once it does, you are in prime position to maneuver and to finesse and to say, hey, we're right here with your future, ready to sell it back to you. And then, oh, by the way, we're making some decisions and some evaluations on our own guys to decide if we got somebody worth building around right here in-house.
And the other reason why I think you wait, when you sign guys to the extensions, they don't kick in for another year, and they are basically impossible to trade. It is very, very difficult. Toronto would obviously never do it, but if Toronto wanted to trade Scotty Barnes, let's say in 6 months or before the deadline, whenever, it's basically impossible because of you basically are having to take it's very, very difficult because what you are taking in is basically what his current salary is, but what you're trading out is what his new salary is. So they become almost impossible contracts to trade if that's something that you want to look to down the road. And again, the Rockets have all these picks from Phoenix, and if Phoenix all of a sudden decides to change course, that obviously is a team that the Rockets could do business with. But those contracts, again, impossible to trade, basically impossible to trade once you do the extensions before the extensions actually kick in.
All right, Spo, we can reconvene if and when Rafael Stone or Ime Udoka or hell, maybe even the Fertitta, somebody says something of note worth talking about, worth breaking down. Hopefully they do, because that'd be a lot of fun. I think this is a really fun time for the Rockets, honestly. Got a lot of really cool things going on. They got to put it all together on the court, obviously. But this is the offseason. And as far as off seasons go, this is some juice. Number 3 pick, trading to double up your ammo. I'm here for it, man. I'm here for it. It's an entertaining time. So let's get to it. I'll let you get to Rockets brass talking about this pick, man, and we'll reconvene later. He is Adam Spolane. Austin Mendez is handling this thing for us behind the scenes. I am Brandon Scott. This is the H-Town Hoops podcast. Make sure you subscribe, rate, review, tell a friend. We'll see y'all next.